Hello everyone, welcome to our Truth Be Told YouTube channel, with your host Rick Howard and Mike Maney.
Hello everyone. Don't be afraid.
You're scaring me, bro. You're scaring me.
Nobody has hijacked me and replaced me with Frankenstein, but it may look like it. I am paying for my childhood. Every summer, as soon as school was out, for the next 3 months, no hat, no shirt, play ball or swim every day.
Yep.
And pretty much sunburn from head to toe most of the summer. It was only as I got a little bit older that we started using protection, and even then only maybe if I was going to swim all day in somebody's pool, they'd insist I put it on.
Yeah.
Like playing ball all day and stuff. That's the last thing you wanted on your head because, you sweat and then it gets in your eyes and burns.
Right.
And you can't, you got to play ball. You can't worry about sunburns.
Yeah.
And I hated wearing hats, so I never wore a ball hat. So and when you did wear protection, it was, the only thought was the short term. I don't want to get a bad sunburn.
Right.
You had no thought of long term.
Yeah.
The effect it would have on you years to come.
Yeah. Well, what 8-year-old kid is thinking long term while they're holding a bat at home plate? Right.
The only long term thing was, my next at bat.
Yeah, you're right. Yeah.
And so, I have to go to the dermatologist pretty often, and they used to always use liquid nitrogen, to spray all the spots. But obviously, as you can see on the screen, it's way too many for liquid nitrogen.
Yeah.
So they give me what I call chemo cream, Fudex.
Yeah.
And they just said, put it on from the neck up.
Wow.
Just put it on all open spaces.
Wow.
We have no hair. I have a lot of open spaces. And so I've been doing it for 5 weeks now. And they just told me yesterday I could stop using it on my face because it looks like it has more than done the job. But I need to keep doing it on top of my head.
Yeah.
So the worst is over. And the nice thing about it is, Tara told me, she says, Dad, last time you did this is 7 years ago. So last time you did this, after you healed all up, you look 10 years younger.
No, bless her heart.
So I'm getting ready to turn 70 in October. So I'm hoping I'll only look 65 when I turn 70.
Nice.
But anyway.
Shall I add that to my prayer list? Oh, Lord, make him look.
For those of you watching this video, you may want to consider just changing over to audio only. I don't want to be a distraction from what we're about to say. Today is August the 21st, 2024, and we have had the most pleasant August after having the hottest June and July on record, like 25 days or something total of 100 and over. August has just been delightful. Somebody turned on the nature's air conditioning. That's what we call it here. We call it the Delta breeze.
Yeah.
There's a pass over in the coast range of foothills that sometimes lets the ocean air come through to the valley. And especially this last week, it's like only like 5 to 10 mile an hour breeze, but it's cool, because it gets here from the ocean.
Yeah.
And it's so pleasant, and been in the 80s, maybe low 90s.
Okay.
But for this time of year, we'll take it. And so, anyway, have you had your first snowstorm there in Missoula?
Well, no, we had another windstorm. Not like the other one, but another windstorm came in, thunder, rain. So we're getting the latter rains, as they call it, a little bit early. So we're getting more rain. And right now it's supposed to be, I guess, the 80s today. So Yeah, it's cooled down for us too. Oh, well, right now it's 77, but I think it's supposed to be in the 80s today.
You may not even have another 90-degree day, huh?
I don't know, the way it's just been unpredictable. Everything is just
Yeah.
like unpredictable. This is just
Mm.
weird.
We often have what we call an Indian summer.
Yeah, Indian summer. I love
Yeah,
it.
so long
Yeah,
about in October, we can have a couple of weeks of
nice
where
weather.
the heat's increasing
Yeah, yeah,
before it finally gives up.
yeah.
Hey, we should have thought ahead of time. You would have had to do it, not me.
Mm.
Is have a picture of a virtual chocolate cake with the number 100 on top, because today is our 100th session together.
Yes, yes, yes.
And we made it to 100 sessions without declaring each other a heretic one time. It's pretty good, Mike.
That is very good. Yes. Yeah. How did we
Now,
do that?
others out there may have
Yes.
said that to themselves, but
Maybe we're not true Baptists.
we need to get with it, huh? We need to,
Yes.
we
Yes.
need to, what should we say? Be contentious for the faith.
Yes. So how long has it taken us to reach 100 sessions?
Let me see. I think I have that right here. Our first session was on June 20th, 2020. And we did about 3 or 4 sessions at least before you figured out how to put them up on YouTube.
I remember that. Yes, I do.
So it was sometime in July, I think, late July or something before the first session got put up.
Uh-huh.
But June 20th, 2020. So over 4 years ago.
Wow.
So, we had gaps of time where we had technical problems or
Yes.
vacations or illness, or
Yeah.
both you and I had COVID at one time.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it took us 4 years to get to 100 sessions. But here we are.
Here we are. Yeah. Yeah.
Session 100. We didn't really work real hard to do this, but it worked out to where session 100 will conclude not only the book of Deuteronomy, but the first 5 books of Moses.
We didn't plan it that way.
No, we didn't plan it that way.
No.
Actually, I think probably in our minds, we may have taken about 25 sessions to get through the first 5 books, and it took us 100 sessions.
Yeah. Yeah.
But we were not in a hurry. We weren't going anywhere. The Bible wasn't going anywhere.
In fact, along the way, we had interviews with other people.
Yeah.
So
And we still would if some of you would volunteer.
Yes. Yes.
We're going to be moving into the book of Joshua. I don't know how many sessions that will take, but
100.
Braden Barnum is going to come on one session, but we wouldn't mind, say we took 10 sessions to get through Joshua.
Mm-hmm.
We wouldn't mind if over half of those had guests to share your thoughts with us as we go through that book of Joshua.
Yes.
So I know some of you have preached sermons from it, taught lessons, studied through it, have concluded some good things that others would like to hear.
Mm-hmm.
So seriously, consider coming on with us. Pick what part of Joshua you'd like to discuss with us,
Mm-hmm.
and we'll just try to be good hosts and not speak over you too much.
Yeah. We'll try not to beat you up too badly.
we promise not to handle it in such a way that you'll say, "You set me up."
Do we come across as intimidating? Are we? No one has really volunteered outside of, one has volunteered. That's Andrew. The others we've approached. Okay.
Well, Tasso volunteered.
Oh, that's right. Tasso volunteered.
Preaching from the Old Testament.
That's right. Yes.
Yeah, he's actually the first one that volunteered.
Yeah. But are we too intimidating? Is that why people aren't lining up to come on?
That may be giving us too much credit. It may be something less sinister but more humbling.
Yes.
That when they figure out what they're talking about, maybe I'll volunteer.
Yeah. Yeah, I think you nailed it. Yeah, I think you nailed it, really.
So we are going to conclude Deuteronomy today, and we did chapter 32 last session. It was full of prophetic truth.
Mm-hmm.
And what a lot of people don't realize is chapter 33 continues this same thematic prophecy type language. Chapter 33 is real interesting. It's kind of Moses' version of what Jacob did in Genesis 49. So both of them, just before they died,
Mm-hmm.
pronounced particular blessings on each of the tribes.
Mm-hmm.
But in the blessing is also prophetic.
Yeah, yeah.
And it goes way beyond the present. It even goes way beyond them conquering and possessing the land. It even goes way beyond their entire history leading up to the coming of their Messiah and his death and resurrection. It goes even unto the return of Christ and into the millennial.
Mm-hmm.
So very far reaching, very far reaching. And I think Moses, of course, God directed him, but I think Moses intentionally had Jacob in his mind of what Jacob did before his death. And Moses had that same desire and burden and that same permission, but more than permission, that same inspiration from the Spirit to pronounce prophetic truth to the people. And when we were going through Genesis, we emphasized Genesis 49:1. Jacob called his sons and said, "Gather together that I may tell you what shall befall you in the last days."
Yeah.
And that's a lot of what Moses is doing in chapter 33. But one thing I hadn't noticed as much before as I do now is that chapter 32 and 33 is somewhat like Matthew 24 and 25. Many people, when they want to look at what Jesus taught about the end times, will go to Matthew 24 and then stop and not go directly into chapter 25. But chapter 25 is just a continuation.
Yes.
And chapter 33 of Deuteronomy, I see now, is much the same. It's a continuation. And he uses the blessing on the tribes to enlarge upon the distant future. And what's interesting about chapter 33 is that chapter 32 is primarily about the history and the future of Israel, of the people, of the God's holy nation. But chapter 33 then takes the blessings to the tribes and enlarges it. The main emphasis in chapter 33 is not about the people, but about their Messiah, the return of Christ. And as we go through this chapter, I'll try to make that argument that chapter 33 is one of the most prophetic chapters in the Old Testament about what we now call the return of Christ. Of course, they would not have heard this and read it later largely with the, and not largely, not much, with the understanding that there would be two comings separated by a long gap of time. They just saw it as the coming of their Messiah. But chapter 33 opens up. Let me just read a few verses here and get into why I think this is very end time language in the return of Christ language. Now, this is the blessing with which Moses, the man of God, blessed the children of Israel before his death. And he said, "The Lord came from Sinai and dawned on them from Seir. He shone forth from Mount Paran, and he came with 10,000s of saints. From his right hand came a fiery law. for them. Now,
Mm.
I had to consult some specialists on this, Hebrew specialists,
Mm-hmm.
because I'm definitely not. But I have read and studied enough through the years that I know that the Hebrew verbs are very much unlike Greek and English verbs. They don't really have built into them as much about time factors like past, present, and future. It's real common in the Hebrew language to have the perfect tense, we call it. And so that verbs can be translated as past, present, or future. They're kind of timeless.
Mm-hmm.
And so even though the translations, English translations, have chosen to translate the verbs here, came from Sinai, dawned on them, he shone forth, he came with 10,000s of saints. They have chosen to make it past tense because in their minds, the context is looking back at their escape from Egypt and their travels through the wilderness to the present time. And while that is true, and in much of this may be speaking about that, what we'll find in this chapter is that in other places in the Old Testament is there are verses that speak about the return of Christ with this same language and same geographic locations. I taught a lesson on my end time studies a while back, and we'll get into it a little bit today, what I call the true triumphal entry.
Mm.
And in that study, I tried to make the case that the return of Christ is probably not going to be, and the events connected to it of defeating his enemies and rescuing Israel from the wilderness and the marriage of the Lamb and all those big events. We tend to think of them as all happening like in a 24-hour period.
Mm-hmm.
But I think the case can be made that it's going to cover a period of time of days or maybe weeks.
Mm-hmm.
And that it may involve those mysterious extra 30 and 45 days at the end of Daniel 12.
Mm-hmm.
And we're going to look at verses that I've pretty much come to the conclusion the return of Christ, he may start a journey literally from Mount Sinai and travel the same path they did.
Mm-hmm.
Through Edom, Mount Seir, and up into the Promised Land, because there's so much about. It's kind of hard to describe. I often use the verse Hosea 11:1, "Out of Egypt I have called my son." There's a lot of verses that apply equally to the nation and to the Messiah. You know, he talks about he enters their grief, he enters their experiences, so he may well take a path or at some point go down to Mount Sinai and work his way up to the Promised Land, because part of that journey will be to rescue his newly redeemed nation.
Mm-hmm.
And they'll still be in their natural bodies.
Mm-hmm.
So they can't transport themselves, immediately into Jerusalem or the Promised Land.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
They'll have to begin a march.
You and I have talked about this in a
and I think Christ will actually lead them in a true triumphal entry into the city. Yeah. And when Zechariah 14:4, we talked about this, his feet shall stand on the Mount of Olives. We tend to read into that's the first place his foot touches when he returns, and it might. Mm-hmm. But he might be standing on the Mount of Olives at the end of that triumphal march.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And coming into the city to take over.
Mhm.
And we'll look at some verses that seems to indicate that. But my point is from 33:2 that the Hebrew perfect tense could also possibly include the idea, enlarging from the past truth of this into the future. The Lord will come from Sinai and will dawn on them from Seir. So, like the bright sun, the glory of Christ,
Mhm.
the dawning of the return of Christ, the glory of it all is like a sun shining at dawn. And we often liken the return of Christ to the morning sun, the
Mhm. Yeah.
rising sun coming in from the east. And he may, if he ends up on the Mount of Olives and enters into Jerusalem at the eastern gate, he is literally the Son of Righteousness, S-U-N, as Malachi talks about,
Mhm.
coming in from the east.
Mhm.
So, and to add to that, that part in 33:2, he came, and he certainly did, out of Egypt, but Moses may well be quoting Enoch here. And Enoch prophesied, according to Jude, of course, that the Lord is coming with 10,000s of his saints, Jude 14-15, to execute judgment and wrath on his enemies, to rescue his people, and to set himself up as king. So Jude, that would be a well-known, the fact that Jude knew it so well, thousands of years, or at least 1,500 years after Moses wrote this, certainly Moses knew about that prophecy.
Mhm.
And it's almost a direct quote. So it could read in the Hebrew perfect tense, he will come with 10,000 of saints, as a direct quote of what Enoch was talking about. And so right away we're getting into second coming language instead of only past, only history. And our English versions tend to imply that it's only speaking about the past, but I think it, as much of the Old Testament does, enlarges itself into the future
Mhm. Yeah.
in the same language.
Mhm.
So if this is to be tied into Enoch's prophecy, which I think it is, then it's speaking about the coming of Christ.
Right. Right.
So Moses is saying something to them, and they would probably know about the prophecy of Enoch. Certainly, he would be a very beloved historical figure to them, and they would know why his life was cut short. He was translated because he was a godly man, and they would know about his prophecy. And so, as you and I like to say so often, and Brother Ward used to say this quite often, but it's so true. The language of the Bible has dimension to it.
Mhm. Yeah.
And if you don't give it the dimension it deserves, you're going to limit your understanding of
Mhm.
many of
Yeah.
these kind of verses.
Yes.
So expand your mind. You come across a statement, he came with 10,000s of saints, tie it in with what Enoch said and let it have a prophetic application as well.
Mhm.
So I'm going to try to do that with this whole chapter. I already quoted Zechariah 14:4. Let's go to uh, Isaiah 63. And I've probably brought this verse up several times in our studies. I know I have in my end time studies. That's that famous passage, Isaiah 63. Who is this who comes from Edom
Mhm.
with dyed garments from Bozrah? So, of course, it's Christ. His vesture is dipped in blood. Why is your apparel red? Why are your garments like one who treads in the winepress? Uh, So this is speaking about someone who's been in battle, has his enemy's blood on him.
Mhm.
He's defeated them. Now he's coming from there, from the south, which is what Deuteronomy 33:2 talks about, from the south up into the promised land. And that's where Jesus is said to be coming from in Isaiah 63. And he goes on to say in verse 4 of Isaiah 63, the day of vengeance is in my heart. So that's definitely the second coming of Christ. And the year of my redeemed has come. He talks about verse 6, I have trodden down the peoples in my anger. When?
Mhm.
Coming up from Bozrah and
Mhm.
Edom with his garments drenched in blood.
Mhm.
He's saying what he had just accomplished. I have
Mhm.
trodden down the peoples in my anger, made them drunk in my fury, brought down their strength to the earth. And down at verse 9 is kind of what I was referring to before. In all their affliction, he was afflicted. The idea that a lot of the scriptures that apply to either the Messiah or his nation of Israel can be applied to both. And so I think part of that procession is to rescue them. He said, the year of my redeemed has come. And so he brings up his redeemed people with him in their natural bodies and then glorified bodies through the resurrection and rapture, all making this beautiful, loud, boisterous, joyful procession
Mhm.
into Jerusalem, having
Mhm.
defeated their enemies and now coming to
Yeah.
claim his city,
Yeah.
sit on his throne.
Yeah.
It's a beautiful picture.
Well, when we look at the type of Joshua capturing Jericho, it was with quite the procession of its own.
It's a what? Trumpets and marching.
Yeah.
Trumpets and marching.
Mhm.
That's kind of end time language, isn't it?
Yes, it is. Yes.
It says in Isaiah 34:6, kind of, well, let me go back up to verse 5. For my sword shall be bathed in heaven. Indeed, it shall come down on Edom. So he's coming up from Edom with his sword and on the people of my curse for judgment. The sword of the Lord is filled with blood, not
Mm.
only his garment, but his sword.
Mhm.
It is made overflowing with fatness, with the blood of lambs and goats, with the fat of the kidneys of rams. For the Lord has a sacrifice in Bozrah. There's that Bozrah again,
Yeah.
where he's coming with the sword filled with blood, and not only his garments. He says down in verse 8, it is the day of the Lord's vengeance, the year of recompense for the cause of Zion. Now, that is a deep verse.
Mhm.
A large part of the purpose of the return of Christ is not just to satisfy the day of the Lord's vengeance, but this little statement, the year of recompense, retribution for the cause, or the old King James says controversy of Zion. There is a controversy over Zion, and he's going to settle that controversy with a sword of blood and a slaughter in the land of Edom. And that happens to be where his people are down there in the wilderness, that general area.
You know, there was a controversy with David and the Jebusites. They were taunting and daring him to take the city, and so he did. So there was a lot of bloodshed there as well.
Yeah, exactly. Then let's look at Psalm 68. This is a fascinating psalm that is talking about the return of Christ. So that one thought back in Deuteronomy 33:2, the Lord came or will come from Sinai and will dawn on them from Seir. It's that bright, shining glory. Okay, Psalm 68 starts with that. Let God arise, let his enemies be scattered, let those also who hate him flee before him. So we read verses like this, and we think it's, we look at it kind of generic. It's just talking about the general attitude of God toward his enemies through history.
Mm-hmm.
As smoke is driven away, so drive them away. As wax melts with the fire, so let the wicked perish at the presence of God. Let the righteous be glad. Let them rejoice before God. Let them rejoice exceedingly. Certainly both of these will happen at the return of Christ. And then sing to God, sing praises to his name, extol him or exalt him who rides on the clouds. Okay, there is a second coming language right there, isn't there?
Yes, right.
Coming on the clouds. All those Old Testament verses that talk about him as the cloud rider.
Mm-hmm.
And he's described that way quite a bit in the Old Testament. We looked at it in Deuteronomy 32. The cloud rider, 33:26, if we want to go ahead and look at it there, and then go back to Psalm 68. There is no one like the God of Jeshurun who rides the heavens to help you, and his excellency on the clouds. So that's what Moses is talking about. That's what David is talking about. That's what the New Testament writers talk about.
Mm-hmm.
He's coming on the clouds.
Yes, yes.
Every eye shall see him, and they shall weep and mourn because of him. Revelation 1:7 and many other verses. So this all ties in with second coming language.
Mm-hmm.
By his name Yah, the shortened name of Jehovah or Yahweh, and rejoice before him. And then we skip down to verse 7. O God, when you went out before your people, again, that Hebrew verb tense could also have the idea of future. So will go out before your people. When you marched or will march through the wilderness. Now, I know God was with them in the pillar of fire cloud, but we wouldn't say he literally marched with them. But at the second coming of Christ, I think he will literally march through the wilderness before your people. What he did in the pillar of cloud and fire out of Egypt, he's going to do in person at his second coming. That's the argument I'm trying to make. The earth shook. The heavens also dropped rain at the presence of God. Sinai itself was moved at the presence of God, the God of Israel. Then let me see, for sake of time, let's skip down to verse 17. The chariots of God are 20,000, even thousands of thousands. The Lord is among them as in Sinai in the holy place. You have ascended on high. Of course, this is quoted in the New Testament. Paul refers to this, what Christ accomplished in his death and resurrection. You have ascended on high. You have led captivity captive. So, this says it in the past tense, using the Hebrew verbs.
But it was future.
But it's future. So we need to keep that in mind all the way through. You have received gifts among men, even among the rebellious. The Lord God might dwell there. Blessed be the Lord who daily loads us with benefits, the God of our salvation. Our God is the God of salvation. As to God, the Lord belongs escape from death. There's the resurrection. But God will wound the head of his enemies. There's Genesis 3:15. He's especially going to wound the head of his primary enemy, the Antichrist, but he's going to wound the head, a mortal death wound, to his enemies that follow the Antichrist. So a reference to the man of sin. The hairy scalp of the one who still goes on in his trespass. The Lord said, I will bring back from Bashan, I will bring them back from the depths of the sea, that your foot may crush them in blood, and the tongues of your dogs may have their portion of their enemies. And look at verse 24. They have seen your, I think the old King James says goings, but the New King James translates it as procession. They have seen your procession, O God, the procession of my God, my King, into the sanctuary.
Yes, yes.
There it is, isn't it?
Yep, yep.
The true triumphal entry as he descends from the Mount of Olives into the city of the great king, Psalm 48:2. And people are going to see this procession. It's going to be loud. It's going to be joyful. It's going to be victory. It's going to be wonderful. The singers went before. The players on instruments followed it. I think this will literally happen at his return. Among them were the maidens playing timbrels. Bless God in the congregation, the Lord from the fountain of Israel. Goes on to say in verse 29, because of your temple at Jerusalem, kings will bring presents to you. Well, there's Revelation 21 and 22 right there, isn't it?
Yes.
The kings of the earth bring the glory of the nations into the city.
You know, Brother Rick, as I'm listening to you, and like I said, we've talked about this before. We're asking our viewers to stretch their thinking, because I had to do that, and kind of just to reshuffle the cards, as it were. And instead of thinking of Jesus just coming down, straight out of heaven, touching the Mount of Olives and heading straight into the sanctuary, what you're describing is something that we see a lot, even in this life. When there's an inauguration of a president, there's a procession. I remember Jimmy Carter wanted to walk to the White House instead of being, okay.
Yeah, wasn't that in a blizzard? It's like 50 below. That I remember everyone dressed up in heavy jackets and gloves.
But you think about it, the opening of the Olympics, there's just such a procession of all the countries with their banners and their delegates marching in procession on to leading up to the great event. And so this is something, Jesus going into Jerusalem, okay, the palm branches. So
that's why he allowed it, huh? That's why he allowed it.
There's a procession. There's a whole procession, a buildup of the king taking office.
He wanted to show them a number of things, I'm sure, but two things he wanted to show them is that this is a small-scale version of what's going to happen at my return. And number two, he wanted to show them why it could not take place at that time, because their hearts weren't ready for it.
Yeah.
And he went in and cleansed the temple.
Yeah.
To show that. Cleansing the temple was partly to show why the triumphal entry was not a success as they wanted it to be.
Yeah.
But if we skip down to verse 32 of Psalm 68, sing to God, you kingdoms of the earth. Oh, sing praises to the Lord, Selah. To him who rides on the heaven of heavens, which were of old. Indeed, he sends out his voice, a mighty voice. There's 1 Thessalonians 4:16. With the voice, with the shout, with the trumpet. It's going to be noisy. It's going to be visible. It's going to be, and of course, this is language of his return, not just to rescue his people, as the pre-trib rapture says, but to destroy his enemies in a post-trib setting. So all of this is a post-trib time setting, the way we would look at it now. They wouldn't have thought of it in those kind of terms, but so this voice, this mighty voice, this trumpet, the shout, all that goes along with it, is at the return of Christ, the resurrection and rapture, and the defeat of his enemies, and the rescue and triumphal entry into Jerusalem. Verse 34, ascribe strength to God, his excellence is over Israel, and his strength is in the cloud. So it keeps this cloud, sky, heavens, riding on the heavens in verse 33, cloud rider idea that the New Testament writers clearly pick up from these kind of verses.
Yes, yeah.
To describe the return of Christ. So I hope some of that gives foundation or enough background to those who may have doubted when we started out this session, of thinking I was stretching this chapter out too far to make it a end times return of Christ prophetic kind of language, and not just about their history, but about their future.
Mhm.
In back to chapter 33, he's coming with 10,000s of his saints. So connect, of course, to Enoch in Jude 14 and 15. And these saints, if you want to make them angels, it would be equally true. He's coming with 10,000s of his angels. He's coming with his mighty angels in his glory. Matthew 16:27 and other verses talks about him coming with his angels. 2 Thessalonians chapter 1 ties it in with the idea of fire and flames with his holy angels. And this verse does too. At the end of verse 2, from his right hand came a fiery law for them. So we think, well, that's the 10 Commandments on Mount Sinai. But it could be translated as like a flaming fire. He's coming with a flaming fire. So not just what happened during Moses' time on Mount Sinai, literally, but what will happen in the future. It's coming. He will be a benevolent dictator, but a dictator nonetheless, and he will have a fiery law that the whole world will have to obey or suffer the consequences.
Well, isn't that how John saw him in Revelation?
It is in that first chapter. You're looking it up?
Yeah.
To find the exact
Yeah.
language.
I'm in chapter 2. Yeah, Revelation 1:14. New King James. His head and hair were white like wool, as white as snow, and his eyes like a flame of fire. His feet were like fine brass, as if refined in a furnace, and his voice as the sound of many waters. And so yeah, there's a fire associated with his return.
So instead of reading all through this chapter and the different tribes, there's a lot of good things said in here. But maybe go down to like we read verse 26, who rides the heavens to help you, his excellence on the clouds. So the Lord, simple eschatology, return of Christ language is that he's coming from heaven on the clouds with 10,000s of his saints, destroy his enemies,
right,
and to march into his city and take over.
Yeah.
Well, this chapter covers all of that.
Yes.
Covers all those major themes. So I think it fits. If you think I'm pressing it too much, you're welcome to come on and rebut. But it has to be live on screen.
Yes. Yes.
But like so much of the New Testament does, it makes a practical, helpful, edifying application to us in light of all of this. Like what he says, and of course you appreciate the name Asher, of course, down in verse 24. And of Asher, he said, Asher is the most blessed of sons. Let him be favored by his brothers, and let him dip his foot in oil. Now, I don't know if your Asher has this verse memorized and expects his siblings to treat him this way.
Right.
Let him be favored by his brothers. He's the most blessed of sons. If he hasn't got that verse memorized, I'd be surprised, because if I had a name of Asher, I'd have a T-shirt with this verse on it. Maybe Grandpa can buy him a T-shirt with this verse on it.
and I would make my
and your other grandkids will be upset with you.
Yeah. I'd make my siblings memorize it too.
Yeah. But one thing that's interesting about this is that this seems like a very big, important prophetic statement about Asher. And yet, how much do we know about Asher through the rest of the Old Testament?
Mm-hmm.
Unless I'm missing something, we're not told much.
Right.
And yet, this seems to be such a profound blessing.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm wondering again if this has, in some way, we just don't know yet, a prophetic application to the time of the return of Christ, and how the tribe of Asher may have a special place in the kingdom. I don't know.
Yeah.
It seemed like there's something more there than what first meets the eye.
Mm.
It says, let him dip his foot in oil. So the idea of being anointed.
Mm-hmm.
So the anointed ones will be with Christ at his return, and they will be most blessed of sons. So, it's easy to make a prophetic application to the 10,000s of saints that return with Christ, his bride. And then it says, but I've always liked verse 25, a very kind of a practical application in light of all the end time events and preparing for the return of Christ. Your sandals shall be iron and bronze.
Mm.
That's not very comfortable sandals, is it?
Right. Right.
But they're sandals made for a tough trip, tough time.
Mm-hmm.
So they're not comfortable because life often is not comfortable. And in light of the coming of Christ, things will get more difficult. And in a spiritual sense, we need sandals made of iron and bronze.
Mm.
There's really some good spiritual application there, because it goes on to say, as your days, so shall your strength be.
Mm.
So that really ties in with many other scriptures that indicate a major theme that I bring up as often as I can, to the point people probably think it's a broken record. But I really think there's something in this verse about, yes, it will be a great tribulation, and yes, there will be many martyrs, and there will be lots of persecution and opposition. But God's grace is up to the task,
Mm-hmm.
and he will give us sandals of iron and bronze, and he will give us strength as our days are.
Mm-hmm.
So the days will be tough, needing those kind of sandals, but the grace and the strength will be there when we need it.
Well, I think we see that in miniature form through the Apostle Paul, him wearing those same types of sandals and putting up with everything he put up with.
Yes,
and the list.
He had sandals of iron and bronze, didn't he?
Yes, and grace was with him as well through all of it.
I just think it's important for us to bring this up often as pastors, Bible teachers, because even those among our people who hold to our position of a post-tribulation resurrection rapture, that we will go through the Great Tribulation, or the saints will, the church will. But even many who hold that position have a picture of us, running in fear, hiding in caves, and we may do some of that at different times, who knows? But I think the picture in the Bible is pretty much the opposite. We will be bold as lions. We will have the grace to speak freely and zealously, fervently, truthfully. Perfect love will cast out fear. And I think we will have as close to perfect love because of God's grace during that time as at any time in our history. And we love to study the history of the Anabaptists, and a lot of those we read about had a total absence of fear at the time of their being burned at the stake or being drowned or whatever, however they were killed. The Lord's grace was there, and it was a powerful witness to those who saw it. I think that same kind of witness will be in the Great Tribulation.
Well,
We will have the frame of mind. They can kill my body, but they can't kill my soul.
yeah. You know, when you
That's what
think of
Jesus said.
their feet being shod with the gospel of peace, for them to put up with all that you're saying that they put up with, they would have to be of iron and brass. They couldn't be soft. They had to be tough as they wore those sandals of representing the good news. Their witness had to be tough, had to be consistent. And you're right. If they showed fear, then that would do damage to their confidence in the one they're preaching to the others. And so I think you're spot on. I think we tie all this together. Those shoes being of that material symbolizes a resilience, a toughness, as they carried the gospel.
So I think this verse can be, it's what the New Testament does often in context of the end times. It often gives encouragement, practical advice, what our frame of mind should be as we face that. And this is that kind of verse that don't worry, God will be with us and help us.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
This
When I am
chapter
weak,
ends.
then I am strong, right?
Yes, yes, yes. This chapter ends in verse 29. Happy are you, O Israel. Who is like you, a people saved by the Lord? So I started out by saying chapter 32 and 33 should be looked at as like Matthew 24 and 25 as a unit. And so chapter 32 really talked a lot about their rebellion and God's judgment on them, kind of a theme through it. Matthew 25 ends with his right hand sitting with him in his kingdom. This ends a real. Can you hear me, Mike?
We had a little glitch, so I paused it. So we're back on now.
Oh, okay. Yeah, we had a little glitch. All I heard was recording stopped.
Yeah.
Okay, so it's just a little glitch that.
Yeah. So I paused
we can
it.
just leave in there if you want, or
I
take it out
paused it
later.
because you were stationary. I mean,
Uh-oh.
the image froze. So yeah.
Uh-oh. So this chapter ends in a very uplifting message. Your enemies shall submit to you, and they will, and you shall tread down their high places. Now, high places in the Old Testament often referred to the pagan idols and buildings, temples that they would build up on the tops of hills and mountains. The idea here is that in the millennial, all God's going to destroy, partly through his people, I guess, the pagan worship that is so prevalent throughout the world now. And we're seeing a lot of that at this Democratic convention this week. Paganism, Satanism, offering free abortions right outside the convention hall. Those kind of things are going to be put to a stop. So these are Moses' last words. They're very far-reaching, and they reach all the way to Israel's ultimate destiny of victory through their Messiah. And of course, the New Testament all the faithful saints of all ages will be there with him as his bride. And we may as well end our 100th session in chapter 34, the death of Moses. We may as well end with a controversy at the death of Moses. Then Moses went up from the plains of Moab to Mount Nebo to the top of Pisgah, which is across from Jericho. And the Lord showed him all the land of Gilead as far as Dan, all Naphtali, the land of Ephraim, Manasseh, all the land of Judah as far as the western sea. So he could see the Mediterranean.
Mhm.
from where he was. The south and the plain of the valley of Jericho, they didn't have any smog, did they? They
Yeah.
had no fires and smoke like we do often here. The valley of Jericho, the city of palm trees, as far as Zoar. And then he tells him, this is the land which I swore to give Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. But you shall not cross over. You shall not cross over there.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
Moses, the servant of the Lord, died there in the land of Moab, according to the word of the Lord. He was buried in a valley, the land of Moab, opposite Beth Peor, but no one knows his grave to this day.
Mm.
Now, here's the controversy. So Jude not only brings up the prophecy of Enoch of the Lord's return with 10,000s of his saints, a prophecy that is not recorded in the book of Genesis during the lifetime of Enoch, but it was a well-known prophecy that was brought down to the New Testament.
Mhm.
And here, Jude also brings up this event and talks about Michael the archangel and Satan fighting over the body of Moses.
Yes.
Do you have any thoughts on that, Mike?
The only thing I can think of is that Israel may have had a tendency to enshrine Moses and revere him more than they did. Because even to Jesus, they boasted that they were of Moses. So imagine if they knew where his grave was, they would have built a shrine to it and had worshipped him even more so.
Well, I think you make an excellent point. I think that's a big part of it.
Mhm.
That, well, first of all, God told him, you're not going to enter in.
Mhm.
And if they knew where he was buried, they probably would have dug him up
transported his
because
bones.
they already had the bones of Joseph.
Yeah.
So the precedent in their mind was there.
Yeah.
Somebody really important in our history,
Yeah.
under God's permission, we are taking Joseph's bones and burying them in the land of promise. We need to do the same thing for the bones of Moses.
Mm-hmm.
So I think you're really onto something there. And if they could have done that, I think when God said, I'm not going to let you enter in, he meant even your dead body.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
You're in no way are you going to enter in.
Yeah.
And this would have violated, I think, God's
It
intentions
would have violated
with the body of Moses.
Yeah.
In essence, they could have overruled God's
edict.
Edict. That's a good word. Edict. And then, but why did why did Satan want the body of Moses?
Maybe for that very reason.
For that very reason.
Mm-hmm.
Because if he could have brought to pass a transporting of the body into the land of promise,
Mm-hmm.
He could have defeated, anytime he able to make God unable to keep his promise or his edicts, then it's a defeat of God. But it's more than that. It's in essence saying God's not really God.
Yeah.
If I'm able to overpower his will.
It's a fist in God's face. That would have been a fist in God's face.
Yeah, very much so.
Yeah.
And then the other thing I thought of, might be part of it too, is it's a real common thing in religions, even in our day, especially like the Catholic Church, they're
artifacts,
relics, they call it.
Yeah.
And a relic could be the bones of one of their saints, their so-called saints.
Yeah.
And if a church has the bones of one of their saints, they call it a relic. Now, a relic, I didn't know this until I researched it because I didn't care about it before. But a relic, there's three levels or three classes of relics. The highest class of relic is if you have like the bones of one of those you've declared a saint. And that creates the biggest and most emotional response from your followers and their money, of course, too, is to say you have in your church, your parish or whatever, the bones of one of your saints, and that brings more people in, which brings more money in.
Mhm.
So they would guard those relics.
Yes.
Sometimes they would be vandalized and the relic stolen, and there'd be like a huge scandal. The second class of relic is to have something they owned, like a piece of clothing or a sword or a cup, something that belonged to them that they actually used and touched, is a second class. And then the third class is just something they touched. And this is where the Catholic Church would expand the idea of relics beyond belief. Because then they could say about anything, they found as a piece of furniture or a piece of clothing or something, they could just say the saint touched it.
Yeah.
And they could get the job done.
Yeah.
And so it promoted a lot of lying and cheating and
Yeah.
deception and everything like that. But my point is, religions have often used relics or skeletons, remains of some important person, as a way to actually promote, we would call it idolatry.
Well, look what they've done to the Holy Land. All these different stations and places, they've built their little monuments and shrines, and
there's candles and shrines and everything around every holy place.
Yeah, they've taken over.
Which the Bible discourages, let's say, to put it mildly.
Yeah.
And then to add to that, since they revered Moses so much, even more, Joseph was an important man in their history, but he lived before them. They got to see and hear Moses, and he brought them the law.
Yeah.
And so, like they did with the brazen serpent, they turned that into an idol, didn't they?
Yeah.
Nehushtan, that's 2 Kings. Let's see, where is that? I think I wrote that down. 2 Kings 18:4. Hezekiah destroyed that. So hundreds of years later, Hezekiah in his reformations destroyed that brazen serpent because they had set it up as an idol, because it represented, a great act of God, and they took it beyond what it was supposed to be. They probably would have. So that mindset was in them to turn an important item into an idol. So certainly the remains of Moses would have even more so fit into that mindset. So,
well, a mindset already displayed at the base of Sinai with the golden calf. So they created a relic. And so, there's just something about having to see something. I remember when I was a young boy and a Catholic, they play off they play off the senses. You first walk in and they have a little dish of holy water mounted to the wall. And so you would dip your finger in that, sponge, holy water, and you make the sign of the cross. So there's that feel, so the touch. Okay. And then you're immersed in incense. So your sense of smell would be affected by the incense. Okay. And then of course the relics and the statues and the candles that were over on the corner that were lit. So there was all the visual stimulation too. And so you felt religious because you were just immersed. Your whole senses were all affected by that. And so it stimulates, you feel that you've touched God, as it were.
Well, they would have elevated, I mean, they did anyway during the time of Christ, they elevated Moses beyond what they should have. He was a great man, but
as Paul said, greater than Moses has come.
Greater than Moses has come.
Yeah.
And it's one reason on the Mount of Transfiguration, Peter said, let's build 3 tabernacles.
Yeah.
And a voice from heaven shouted out, this is my son, you listen to him.
Yeah.
Elijah and Moses were great.
Yeah.
My son is greater.
Yeah.
And so it's human nature to elevate other humans higher than they should be, even to the level of Christ.
Mm-hmm.
And God was preventing that
Yeah.
by hiding the body of Moses.
Yeah.
So he's actually doing them a favor by
Yeah.
hiding the body of Moses.
Yeah.
I do think, though, that knowing Israel, I wonder how many hundreds of attempts were made after this to find the body of Moses. Don't you think?
You see broken shovels all up and down that hill.
But one thing we can gather from what Jude says about the battle over the body of Moses is that it was a true event. It really did happen.
Yeah.
There really has been conflict between Michael and Satan. So there's not just a big reason for Israel that God hid his body, kind of really doing them a favor, preventing them from major sins.
Mm-hmm.
But there's a big reason between God and Satan to hide the body of Moses. And that's the part that's a little bit of a mystery. Why was it such a big deal for God to hide the body of Moses from Satan? But again, Satan could have then deceived the people to take the body in to bury it, violate God's edict.
Mm-hmm.
I think there's something maybe even deeper than that. And I have no way of proving this, but in my mind, I'd love to think that if that true triumphal entry is correct, and Jesus literally marches the same path they marched from the south up into Jerusalem, and he has the redeemed nation of Israel with him, will he stop at the place Moses is buried and raise him at that point as a witness to everyone? I meant what I said back there. No one knew where this body was, but I know. I'm going to raise him up in front of all of you as kind of a exclamation point to everything you've seen these last 30 days or 75 days or whatever long it takes to do all this. It's kind of like a closing nail of, hey, we need to stop here for a minute. I want all of you to pay attention. Moses, come forth.
Yeah. Well, at the very least, whether that happens or not, at the very least, to demonstrate that, because he's taking the same path as Moses did. Moses died, God killed him, and he was buried there. For Jesus to go there and keep going, he is declaring that he's a greater than Moses.
You're right. Yeah.
So he's gone beyond where Moses was allowed to go. On these relics, do you think that's why the Ark of the Covenant has not been discovered?
Yes. We could enlarge this discussion to many things. That's why they claim they know, but that's why we really do not know the exact place Jesus was born. That's why we do not know the exact date on the calendar he was born. We have all kinds of ideas. We try to narrow it down. So many things about the life of Christ God chose not to put in the Bible because if we knew for a fact, then it'd be worse than those shrines and candles you talked about at all the places they think these things happened. It'd be turned into idolatry to the extreme, and certainly with the Ark of the Covenant, that thing, that would be like the idol of all idols. When Israel, several times tried to take the ark into a battle, thinking it was the ark that would win them the victory, and God let them be defeated.
Yeah.
He's letting them know it's not that piece of wood covered with gold. It's what it represents, and it's who dwells between the cherubim.
Well,
It's not that piece of furniture that gives you the victory.
look what the Muslims have done with the Kaaba. It's a shrine of its own.
That is definitely a shrine.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's in our nature, right? It's in our nature to do this, whether you're Catholic or Muslim, or even Israel, with the brazen serpent. It's just in our nature to have something in front of us that we can bow down to.
Wouldn't it be not ironic, fascinating in an evil sense, that if the Antichrist and the false prophet make that shrine, Muslim shrine, speak?
Oh, wow. Wow. Wow.
And turn that Kaaba into a gigantic speaker.
Yeah.
That through technology, of course, could be heard around the world.
Well,
and that's where the orders from headquarters come from.
Yeah.
During that time,
almost as if in your face, Jesus, you said that you could make the rocks cry out. Well, we'll make the rock cry out.
Well, I mean, the whole thing about the Antichrist, the false prophet, and Satan during that time is attempted replications,
imitations
of Christ.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because so much of what he is and what he does will be an attempt to imitate Christ,
including the miracles. We don't know what all miracles there'll be.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
His death and resurrection, whatever that will entail.
Yeah.
Through AI and technology.
Yeah.
Whether it is literally true or not, it will look to be true.
Yeah.
Enough that people will see it as true.
Yeah. It's a sleight of hand, no matter how it is. It's a sleight of hand. Yeah.
Yeah, because all of his attempts at imitation fall short. But part of the deception is it won't look like it has fallen short.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, just like with the Magi there in Egypt, their snakes fell short of Moses' snake, and so whatever Antichrist cooks up, the false prophet, it's going to fall short when the real deal shows up.
Yeah.
When the real Christ shows up, takes over. Yeah. A lot of good stuff today, brother.
Well, we gave people at least some possible reasons why Satan wanted the body of Moses. We're not told directly.
Right.
But I think the reasons we gave make sense.
Yeah.
They fit within Bible parameters. Whether all of them are so or not, they make Bible sense. So let's finish this chapter to close out session 100. And when it says at the end of verse 6, no one knows his grave to this day, if Jesus is marching right by it on his way into Jerusalem, he'll say, I know the place of his grave. Come on out, Moses.
Yeah.
Moses was 120 years old when he died. His eyes were not dim, nor his natural vigor abated. He did not let the old man in. That's pretty amazing, huh? 120 years old and just as strong.
Yeah.
So that was one thing that tells us is that manna was the super health food. Provided every item of nourishment the body needed.
Yeah.
For him to be 120, his eyesight and his body, his strength was as good as ever. And for 40 years, all he lived on was manna.
Yeah.
That was a superfood.
Yeah. Well, it was an anti-stress factor because all the stress that Israel gave.
They say stress shortened your life. Moses should have died long ago. And the children of Israel wept for Moses in the plains of Moab 30 days. So the days of weeping and mourning for Moses ended, and Joshua the son of Nun was full of the spirit of wisdom, for Moses had laid his hands on him. There's one of the early places we have that we still talk about laying on of hands.
Yeah.
and the value of it, the deep meaning behind it. So the children of Israel heeded him and did as the Lord had commanded Moses. But since then, there has not arisen in Israel a prophet like Moses, whom the Lord knew face to face. And many, many great prophets came after Moses, but not like this.
Yeah.
They had visions and dreams, and the Lord would speak to them in various ways, but it was always in a kind of a veiled fashion, not like Moses got to talk to him. In all the signs and wonders which the Lord sent him to do in the land of Egypt, before Pharaoh, before all his servants, and in all his land, and by all that mighty power and all the great terror which Moses performed in the sight of all Israel. And so we kind of sadly, even though what takes place in Joshua and even after Joshua, we certainly will be referring to Moses again because he's such a looming figure. But we close out the life of Moses kind of with some sadness because we have traveled along with Moses for many sessions, haven't we?
Yes, we have. Yes, we have.
I feel like he's been the unseen third person in the sessions. Walking along with us, and it makes me appreciate Moses more than ever.
You know, back to that verse that you read where he laid his hands on him. There's your chain of custody. And so
I like that term you used at Noah's ordination. Chain of custody.
Chain of custody. You know, another thought. Back to.
I'm glad I stirred up a few thoughts, Mike.
You did. The devil and Moses. Okay. The body. If he could make that body appear to have life again, to have a premature resurrection, as it were.
Oh.
And then inhabit that body, and then make Moses speak or say things that would prop up the devil, would prop him up, rather than Christ. No, it's just kind of a 180. Now we're seeing a whole different Moses, inhabited by Satan as Satan's puppet.
Wow. There might be something there, Mike, and even extending it to the Mount of Transfiguration. Because it looked like real bodies, Moses and Elijah.
If it didn't, he wouldn't have said, "Hey, let's make tabernacles."
Yeah, right.
Right.
So, if Satan could have stolen the body of Moses, I don't know how much Satan knew about the future and the Mount of Transfiguration, but that would have made it would have made that whole, Christ planned that event, and I don't know how that would have hindered that. So again, Satan's purpose in having the body was to thwart the power and plan of God, and therefore, make himself appear to be more powerful than God.
And the thing about the three tabernacles is, he wasn't elevating Christ over those two other men. He was one of three.
Yes.
And that's a no-no. That's why
a no-no.
God intervened.
He is one of three, but
him.
not those three.
Yeah. He's not
one
just
of a higher
prophet.
three.
Yeah.
To make them all equal is to, in essence, deny the Trinity, deny the divinity of Christ. Yeah, so that's a big deal. So when God shouted out from heaven, "This is my beloved son, hear him." It might be seen as partly a rebuke. You're not giving my son the honor he deserves.
Yeah, exactly.
He's way above Moses and Elijah.
Yeah.
Well,
So
I sure have enjoyed these first 5 books of the Bible.
Yeah, essentially he was telling Peter, "Okay, drop and give me 50 because you just said whatever. What you just said, I'm not going for it." Wow. Well, you squeezed out a lot of stuff out of this chapter, brother.
Well, I know some people may say this to themselves, so I may as well say it out loud. But these end time sessions I do, I've done 50 of them, and I've got at least 5 more. I'm going to start again in September.
Oh, okay.
So that whole large subject, and knowing that, as many have said, 25% or so of the entire Bible is prophetic in nature, and most of that is what we would call the second coming more than the first coming, as far as the amount of prophecy involved. And so it's made me look at the Bible more prophetically. Revelation 19:10, is it, that says the spirit of prophecy is the testimony of Jesus.
Yeah.
So prophecy is all about him.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so it's kind of like we say we're looking for Jesus all through these chapters in the Old Testament. If you're looking for Jesus, it must include his second coming. So that's always in my mind.
Yeah.
And so I come across a chapter like Deuteronomy 33, and it just jumps out at me.
Yeah.
Whereas before, and when I didn't have quite that mindset, I mainly applied it to their past, from Egypt up to that point. But it's obvious now to me that it takes on a much larger role than that.
Yes.
Anyway, I have no idea where the next 100 sessions will take us.
Well,
we're going to trade it.
Let's just do it all in Joshua. Another 100 just in Joshua.
Let's go into those chapters where it names all the names of the people of each tribe, and it names the names of the towns they inherited, all the names we can't pronounce.
Right.
Try to make a session out of each one of those names.
Yes. Oh, man.
But the next 100 should be interesting, because it's going to take us, up through the time of the judges into the kings. And so I would think we would move a lot quicker through chapters than we have the first 100. So the next 100 may take us all the way through Malachi. I don't know.
Wow.
But when we get into Isaiah and Jeremiah and Ezekiel, we're going to hit some big stuff regarding prophecy. So that may slow us down some.
Yeah. Now, these first 100 sessions, you were working off of, because you'd already taught this to the Liberty Church. And so you essentially...
I had developed some series of sermons along this line. So I kind of had a rough outline.
Yeah.
What we were going to do. Yeah. So I wasn't going to bring that up, Mike, because you know what that means.
What?
You're going to have to do a lot more of the preparation and presentation.
Because you won't have the outlines in front of you.
I won't have the outlines to go by.
Oh, that's okay. We'll take a year off, and you can draft those outlines.
But hopefully we have studied enough in Joshua, Judges, and Ruth, and into the books of the Kings, and the life of David certainly has a lot about Christ.
Yeah.
That I'm hoping, Mike, and you're the one that brought this up, so now I'm going to put you on the spot. I'm hoping that it's going to be more of a 50-50 situation where you and I are working off each other instead of you being my co-pilot. We're both going to be pilots.
Trust me, I'm very comfortable in the co-pilot seat. Very comfortable. I'll tell you what, let's bring Brother Braden on, and we'll make him do the heavy lifting.
Well, since we'll be starting Joshua, let me see. So it's toward the end of August. So maybe if he's watching this or listening to this later, what do you think? Sometime in, because the first 3 chapters of Joshua has quite a bit.
Yeah.
It may take a few sessions. So maybe sometime for the end of September, 1st of October or something.
Okay.
We'll bring him on. I think it was Joshua 4, wasn't it, that he said he wanted to come on?
Was it 4?
I think it was Joshua 4. So, Braden, start preparing yourself, and maybe in about 3 or 4 sessions from now, we'll bring you on.
Yeah. Amen. I
And
know
we'll
he's
gladly
chomping at the
adjust it according to his family and church and work
Yeah.
schedule.
bit. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
We're a couple of old men who have our hours are a bit more flexible than his.
I've been thinking about having asking Peter to come on as a
Did you want
guest.
to end this session and talk about some of these things offline, or did you want to
Oh,
leave it
yeah,
on?
yeah. Let's close out. Yeah. So our audience, we're not boring our audience here.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
We're going to plot against you once we get off recording.
All right. See you guys.